September 22nd, 2023. This is André Fauteux of 21st Century Housing Magazine, La Maison du 21e siècle in Quebec. And today I'm very pleased to have a neurosurgeon. I don't interview neurosurgeons too often, Dr. Hillel Baldwin, who's an American who actually studied at McGill University.
Good morning. Nice
Yeah,
to be here.
it's good afternoon for us. Very nice talking today. You're in California, I believe?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona,
Oh, right.
southeast Arizona right now, but I spend the bulk of my time in Tucson. So
Right. I see that you had a company called Neuroscience Solutions. Are you still operating 36 years? I mean, 10
um,
neurosurgeon.
so I stopped active neurosurgical practice in 2022 in the spring, and since then I've rewired, so to speak. I'm consulting. I'm on the board of an Israeli robotics team, Tamar Robotics. I'm also on the board of the Environmental Health Trust here in the United States that looks at the effects of electromagnetic fields on health and human wellness. That's EHT. That's EHT Trust, ehtrust.org. For those that are interested, it's a phenomenal website with a wealth of information about using our technology safely. And then I'm starting to do a independent medical examination practice. Over the next several months, I'll be evaluating patients for traumatic brain injury and spinal injuries specifically. So it'll be more of an office-based practice rendering expert opinions. And so I had to do something in my rewirement besides just playing tennis, skiing, and playing guitar. I
Ah,
have to keep my mind active. And so here I am, reading articles and I've gone down the rabbit hole on electromagnetic fields for quite some time. So when you ask me to speak about neurodegenerative diseases and dementia, it's near and dear to my heart.
hmm. Well, I just wanted to say tennis is my favorite sport, but yes, we're going to talk about EMFs today, electromagnetic fields, and I never heard of you before. You were actually the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference 2021. This one was during the pandemic, so on the web. I actually covered the first one in California in 2019. So I know a lot of these people. I've covered EMS for 30 years, healthy housing in general, but EMFs also. And first, I want to ask you, how did you become involved or interested in electromagnetic radiation?
Well, it was sort of a circuitous loop, but my wife several years ago was having a tremendous amount of fatigue and simply not getting well, sleeplessness, and we were actually vacationing in San Carlos, Mexico, which is um, on the Sea of Cortez. It's about a 6 hour drive from Tucson. It's a lovely beach place. And somehow we were listening to a video called Take Back Your Power, which was about the installation of smart meters on homes. And they had interviewed Sam Milham, MD, PhD, who was well known in the field. And he started describing the symptoms of patients with EHS, electrohypersensitivity syndrome, as you will.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, I know Sam very well. He's the former head of epidemiology for Washington State. So he's really actually one of the first scientists in the world to see the link between electromagnetic fields and leukemia, I believe, in workers.
Yeah, and ironically, I think he just passed away from pancreatic cancer within the last 18 months. So we lost a pioneer. But believe it or not, we looked up Sam on the internet on our Wi-Fi connection because that's what we had down there, and we had a phone call, and he was absolutely lovely, and he put us in touch with someone who was a EMF mitigator for homes. And so we went down the rabbit hole of mitigating our exposures,
Was it
which
a building biologist?
um, he was originally a electrical engineer, an electrician, And he was self-taught. He was a protege of Sam. He was a close associate, and Sam recommended him highly over anybody else in our area to come and look at our home. Paul Harding is his name.
Oh, yeah.
And he's out there. He's on YouTube, and Paul's extremely knowledgeable.
Yes.
And we became extremely aware of all the issues surrounding cell phone radiation, things that, we were completely unaware of. I had the latest, greatest, fastest internet in my home with several Wi-Fi repeaters, and we had put solar on our roof some years before with a net metering system that had a series of 2 smart meters. Just so happened outside of my wife's study area, and her study area includes sort of a desk space and then even a meditation yoga space. And she would lean up against the wall or put her legs up against the wall where the smart meters were. And we also were into grounding at the time, and we were using grounding mats in our home.
Okay.
And so all of these things were just a multitude of straws breaking the camel's back, with the grounding being a fallacy, grounding yourself to the grid, which has dirty electricity from solar and variable speed motors. She was getting exposure from the smart meters. We had dirty electricity in the home from the lack of filtration from the inversion of photovoltaic electrical current to AC current. And when Paul came to do the fluke evaluation testing on our home, the things were off the chart. And thankfully, through a series of maneuvers, putting in, we were lucky the house was already wired with just the coaxial cable, which could be converted to Ethernet. We were able to.
So you killed the Wi-Fi altogether?
We killed the Wi-Fi altogether. We don't use it. I gave away I had many friends who were salivating over getting free, Wi-Fi repeaters. I can't even remember the names of those products. We were able to turn off our solar, and we still pay a solar lease fee. And we were able to get the smart meters off our house, and we pay a opt-out feature with our local utility, fortunately, and they have to come and physically read the meter.
So it's a non-communicating meter. Yeah, we have those opt-out fees also here in Quebec.
That's good that you even have the option. I'm not some states and areas don't even have the opt-out option, and it's pretty it's pretty draconian that but that consumers don't have say over their safety exposures.
Yeah.
So that's and then from there we went to Scotts Valley, I believe, in 2019, and met Libby Kelly and Magda Havas and Deborah Davis and a host of others who are active in the field. And when they saw and heard that I was a brain surgeon, the California Brain Tumor Advocacy Group, was hot on my tail. And since then, I've had, calls from legal experts to testify and class action suits. And I have to, tread carefully. But this is how I became involved. And intuitively, Andre, I had always sensed and known that this technology, although transforming, and certainly my field of neurosurgery is highly technical. Although this technology was transforming, it was a double-edged sword on so many levels and had to be utilized in a safe way. And intuitively, I had a sense of the connection between radio frequency and brain tumor causation, and not only that, but neurodegenerative diseases, cancers, et cetera, et cetera. So,
and those studies have been around actually for a long, long time, the glioma studies. I think, was it Michael Repicoli who wrote one of the first ones before he created ICNERP, the body that proposed these ludicrous exposure limits that most countries, if not all, have adopted to only prevent heating of our tissues.
Correct.
And then he
Correct.
created and headed the World Health Organization research project on EMFs. So, and the Harvard ethics group mentioned it, how it's all intertwined. It's revolving doors. These people from industry who work in government, so they're really putting us to sleep on the risk.
Right. Yes.
What did you see in your practice before we talk about the studies? Are you seeing more and more younger people with neurological disorders and cancers?
Well, there's no question that we're seeing a higher incidence of neurodegenerative disorders in younger people. And, the article that I sent you was merely sort of a tip of the iceberg. And I had just seen that article on a PubMed search, specifically looking for neurodegenerative disorders and EMFs. That's from 2019 from these British epidemiologists. So they summarize worldwide data that looks at groups from, I believe, 45 to 74, and then the groups over 75. And so what I was seeing in my own practice, to answer your question specifically, is I was seeing a number of young people who were referred by concerned parents and primary care physicians who had gone down the road of looking at why they weren't well and why they were forgetful or why they couldn't function in school. And they would get an MRI, and the MRI might have some small artifactual dot, and I would be consulted to look at this from a brain tumor perspective. And unlike probably 99.9% of my clinician colleagues, I would do an EMF inventory. And that's something that Deborah and I are working on to actually put into medical schools. There's a grant now that Sharon Goldberg, who you may be familiar with, who's in New Mexico, is going to be involved in EMF education curriculum for medical schools. But I would do an EMF inventory. And, it's not an elaborate task, but, now we'll be able to have something more quantifiable, look at potential screen time, hours on the cell phone. But invariably, all of these kids, and I'll call them kids because I'm 65 now, but invariably all these kids just lived a life of constant exposure. In fact, you could actually, count on one hand or less the amount of times that they weren't in an EMF field, either via a Bluetooth headset, which is a class 2B carcinogen, as you know, by the WHO, where they weren't either experiencing Bluetooth or Wi-Fi at some point or another, and then actively using, a screen. So I would do an experiment, and I would simply say, let's do this. Let's try digital breaks. Can you withdraw? And they looked at me like as if I was crazy, as if I was asking, them to move mountains. And, I'd say to try to take a digital break, for a total of 24 hours on a weekend. And please come back to me if you're still having symptoms. And,
24 hours was enough for the symptoms to be alleviated?
Well, if they could get, 6 hours a day of a digital break on a weekend, that could be enough for some of these people to actually literally see a difference.
Wow, that's amazing. Because we know with autistic kids, they've seen it taking a week or two, Dr. Gelfie's
right.
protocol. And it's always tough to negotiate with the kids and the husband very often, to the mothers trying to convince them. But it really does wonders.
Yeah. So
how's your wife doing today, by the way?
What's that?
How's your wife doing today?
She's doing very well. I wouldn't say she's 100%, but the sleeplessness issue, I think we've conquered. She still suffers from fatigue at times. She has good days and bad days. It used to be a point where she really had difficulty going out and just doing errands being in the fields of, cell towers, et cetera, in and around Tucson, we actually can feel the difference of the higher 5G penetration if we take a road trip through Phoenix. She has not been on a plane in at least, I would say, 4 years, 5 years. So we're getting to a point where we hope to be able to take a singular 1 to 2 hour plane trip somewhere together. So that the fact that she's considering that and willing to do that is truly a step forward. But at the end of a big day, running errands, shopping, going to shopping malls, she'll come home and literally ground in the way of a shower, or we have a sauna. We do detoxification. We did find out that she had some mold issues, so we've been down that rabbit hole. The mold and EMFs are intimately related. And but I would say overall she's doing very well, and wants to get involved with the Environmental Health Trust, because one of the new, and not, I wouldn't say new, but one of the things that the group is embarking on is looking at wildlife and the decreasing population of bee pollination and those things. So she has a level of activism interest, which is good. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, and how long when did she realize she was like
Yeah, so we're looking we're looking at 5 or 6 years now. It's been quite a journey.
Okay. Well, at
Yeah.
least you had Paul to help out, because a lot of people, it can take them 10 or 20 years before they find out what's making them sick.
Right, and it's very difficult because it is costly, and thankfully, yes, we had the resources to do many things that many people do not have the resources to do. And we even did things like putting film on the windows that face the radio towers, in our neighborhood. And we're fortunately well, I wouldn't say several miles now. We're actually right around the corner from some of the small dipole or monopole towers that are up and down the street. But fortunately, we're in a valley, sort of in a valley, and that's very hard to have that in Tucson, where you're sort of shielded. We have very poor cell service at the house, which is which is a great thing.
Yeah, I'm 8 kilometers from the towers, and we bought this property 25 years ago. Listen, before talking about the science, what's been published, I'd like to talk a bit about politics. You surely know Dr. Joel Moskowitz, who actually went to court against the California Public Health Department because they were sitting on this advisory for a few years. Politically, they didn't want to publish it, but people must know that the California Department of Public Health tells people to reduce their exposure, even though the jury isn't out on a causal link. There's so much information out there that, well, perhaps you could tell us what you recommend in terms of the priorities, what people should do to reduce their exposure.
So first and foremost, and then also along those lines, since we're on it, I'll have to put in a plug for the EHT here, where just a couple years ago, they won a landmark case regarding the FCC, with the Supreme Court asking the FCC why they have done nothing to change from 1996 standards. And exactly looking at what you mentioned, heat only, and specific absorption rates, which is the watts per kilogram of tissue, measurements that are from the 1996 standards, and way inadequate for health and human safety. So probably everyone has a cell phone now at this stage in life. It's almost as if it's ubiquitous. We see homeless people who have cell phones, and that's probably the number one source of electromagnetic fields for people globally. And I recommend always carrying it off your body. And if it doesn't need to be active, if we're not expecting a call, why does it need to be on sending and receiving? It can be in airplane mode, and it can function and be a calculator, and even you can read your emails offline, play games. Unless you're actively communicating or expecting communication, I see no reason to have a live cell phone on your body.
Yeah, people don't realize that their cell phone is constantly talking to all the cell towers around, saying it's there. So it's that beacon signal, which is always emitted. And also it's downloading different updates, even though you're not speaking on the phone. So
Correct.
how do you
And
feel?
you see, young people, old people carrying them in, their bras or back pockets. Deborah, I think, published a study with either the Iranians or the Turks about colon cancer rates and
The
cell phone
radius?
exposure. So yes, and the further we go away from the tower, the stronger is the impetus for the phone to actually seek the tower. It amps up, it ramps up, and that software is in there.
So
So
it increases your exposure if you're in your car or a train, subway, or
right,
far away. Yeah.
right. I mean, we are in Faraday cages all the time in our cars. Deborah told me apparently if you have to communicate in the car and you have Bluetooth, it's easier and better for the phone to communicate via Bluetooth to make the call. We actually sought out vehicles where the Bluetooth is controllable on our vehicles. There are many vehicles now, specifically.
Oh, I lost the connection. Are you still there? Oh, are you still there? We were cut off. My screen just froze. Okay, I'm sorry. My screen just froze. I lost the voice, and
Oh,
you were saying that Deborah is found out that if you use the Bluetooth to phone in your car, you're getting less radiation.
that's what she told me. Now this should be measured and quantified. So,
Okay.
we should look into that. If some biologists who can do some, some or like engineers that can do the readings, that would be fascinating. So I was a neurosurgeon actively practicing, and I had to make calls from my car, and I had a whole ritual where yes, I turn on my phone, I connect the Bluetooth, I make the call, and then I turn off the Bluetooth and I put my phone back in airplane mode. And literally, Andre, I'm electrosensitive also, just because of the mitigation that I've done with my wife over the years. I can actually feel the energetics of being near a live cell phone, being in the presence of Bluetooth,
A lot of
and
people,
going by a tower.
a lot of people told me it's like you feel speedy or a little anxious, when you're exposed. When
I
you
call it this is a very scientific, neurological term. I call it a brain crinkle.
think,
So for me personally, it's for lack of a better term, there is some type of just a subtle pain and a sensation
okay,
that's in the back of my neck going up my head,
well,
and it's this awareness, and I'll sort of be driving down the road and look, and oh, lo and behold, in our area there are palm trees. In other areas they're pine trees, like maybe in northern Canada, but they've been disguised, and I'll look and
yeah,
see, oh, there's the fake
yeah,
palm
yeah.
tree.
Well, it's important that you mentioned that you can also feel it, because a lot of people think it's either only genetics, or it's only in your head, or it's only if you had severe brain trauma. But anyone you were so overexposed at the same time as your wife. I don't know if you had kids who were being overexposed also in the house. No.
Oh, well, we didn't have children. We
Okay.
did have pets,
Okay.
that,
Good for
that
them,
both.
because you were living in a microwave oven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. We both had pets that died of oncological disorders,
Oh,
but of course that's not common in dogs that live longer. But if you think about it, the pets are home in at least at our home, they were there in Wi-Fi for quite some time. So yeah.
okay. You mentioned Devra. Now, just people must understand Devra Davis is the founder of the Environmental Health Trust. And I was impressed to learn that many years ago, she was Bill Clinton's advisor for chemical pollution. And she's really an authority in public health. And when you gave that talk with her, and at the EMF conference, you had a panel with Dr. Theo, an Australian neurosurgeon, and yourself, and Magda Havis, a toxicologist from Canada that I know very well, was moderating. You were mentioning, what did she say? We're like the skunks in the parties, eh? Spoiling the party, and people are saying you're radical. Are you a radical?
Yeah. So this is a very fascinating thing in the sense that I'm a neurosurgeon that embraced technology to treat neurological disorders. And my observation over a 29-year, clinical career is that what we have is environmentally acquired illness being treated with ever expanding technology. And so, in some level, we have technologically acquired illness vis-a-vis background EMFs that 25 years ago were maybe 10 to the 2 power. And now we have background EMFs of anywhere from 10 to 8 or 10 to the 10th exponential global world EMF power. And so essentially, we're treating technologically acquired illness with advanced technology. And I see this because I'm on the lists for meetings and journals. There's ever expanding. I mean, even the mRNA technology is being looked at to treat Parkinson's, dementia, and other neurodegenerative disorders.
What's mRNA?
The vaccine technology,
Oh,
the vaccine technology that Pfizer Moderna used is also a gene therapy, and so it's being used. It's being investigated to treat neurodegenerative disorders. But if we drill down and we rewind, we basically see that these neurodegenerative disorders are potentially preventable with the judicious use of the technology or judicious exposures, to technology. So we sort of are the tail wagging the dog or the dog chasing its tail, if you will. And so, am I radical? I don't think I'm radical. I think I would say that we on that panel are not radical at all. We're conscious. What I see is an unconsciousness of people globally who embrace technology without question, who embrace other medical technologies without question that we won't go into in this conference, but it had to do with the pandemic. And there was no critical thinking on the part of so many people and people that I know in my field that simply blindly utilize technologies and are always looking for the next technology to treat today's existing disease or malady or what have you.
I thought
And
I know what mRNA is. I thought you were talking about radiation technology.
yeah,
Make the
yeah.
link. Mhm.
So it's complicated. No, I'm in awe of the technology. You and I are communicating. I'm accomplishing things in my life that I would never accomplish without, the fact that I have a fiber optic connection right here,
I have fiber
to,
optic and cable and Ethernet.
right,
We don't need Wi-Fi. It's actually a better
right,
connection without Wi-Fi.
correct, correct. So, but I just am so concerned. There's not a week that goes by that I don't get a call about someone who is suffering from a new onset potential central nervous system abnormality. I just got a call yesterday about a young woman who likely has a pituitary tumor. And when I did my little over the phone EMF inventory, oh, she's glued to her Bluetooth headsets. They're in her ears 24/7, you know. Or somebody else in my family who, you know, has driven.
I like what you mentioned that it's very low power, but the fact that it's in your ear, it's next to your brain, hours and hours on end.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And so, you know, I have family members now that are suffering from blood cancers, you know, that live in areas with very high exposure and, you know, drove electric cars ever since they, you know, came out. You know, did really nothing to mitigate any of their exposure. Um, and so it is I'm not sure about, you know, exactly what Moskowitz wrote in that article, but it's a cumulative effect. And what so many of the articles mention is that this is sort of like, you know, the new tobacco or asbestos. It took easily 2 decades for these things to manifest. And so we're seeing potentially, and this is alarming, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg now in terms of that review article that mentioned the fact that we have like a 49% increase in the elderly population over 75 in this era, but we have almost a 300 to 500 increase in the rate of neurological deaths in that time frame. And so the United States,
In
in
number,
literally,
not incidents. Was it numbers or incidents?
So it's there's actual numbers, you know, mentioned in the article,
Total death.
sheer numbers, because you're right, statistics are a global overview, and then you can drill down at the actual numbers of neurological deaths. But yes, in terms of neurological deaths, it's a several 100% increase as opposed to just a simple, you know, 50% increase in aging. And
This is
so,
5 years.
you know, and so one of the things that's you know, that critics will say, well, people are living longer. There's a term that I'd never heard before. It's called Gompertzian. You know, that, well, people are living longer, so naturally they'll manifest these things. But these data refute any of that sort of concept that simply living longer results in greater, you know, diagnosis or manifestation of these illnesses. It's not in keeping with any of that concept. So the United States went from 14 to number 2 in the world in terms of neurological death and Alzheimer's incidence, Alzheimer's dementia in literally a 10-year time frame.
Tell me about Lou Gehrig's. It used to be it still is rare, but we never heard of it before until, you know, Lou Gehrig got it. But in recent years, has it gone up a lot?
I can only, as a practicing neurosurgeon, I can say I didn't see a lot of cases. I'm certain that my neurology colleagues were seeing more, and the review articles clearly state that the incidence of it's motor neuron disease is in that grouping, and the articles do refer to motor neuron diseases as an uptick for sure. Yeah.
I began my career as a journalist very early on, writing about 2 kids with cancer. A little girl who died of leukemia and a boy who survived non-Hodgkin's leukemia, lymphoma, and you know, this 30 years ago. So quickly I was asking around, are there environmental links? Because we know child cancer is highly genetic. And that's when I began hearing about pesticides and magnetic fields. So I wrote about Dr. Carpenter's New York Power Lines project and all that. It was actually because Hydro-Quebec wanted to sell electricity to New York, which they're doing today. They're going to put in that line finally, but not from Great Whale. In any case, for years, I've been just privileged as a journalist to speak to all the experts. In 2015, Dr. Belpom, the French oncologist, invited me to Brussels for an EMF conference on actually EHS, electrohypersensitivity, and also multiple chemical sensitivity. and I met Leonard Hardell. And I was really, really impressed. He's an oncologist and epidemiologist, the most quoted in terms of the link with cell phone and cancer. But I asked him, tell us who you are. This was my first recording with an iPad, no Wi-Fi on it. But I was really impressed when he told me that his earlier studies were on dioxin and cancer, and then PCBs, and then glyphosate or Roundup. So this chap was always right, and industry and government always did all they could to discredit him. But his record is, he's batting for 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most important studies he did was the cancer risk, brain cancer risk in people who start using a cell phone daily before the age of 20. What do you tell parents when studies are coming out like that, and government and industry just say, oh, it's not conclusive?
Well, so it's obviously the cell phone for so many people now has become the only mode of communication. My wife and I, of course, are dinosaurs. I have a landline, here right now, and I have a landline in my house. It's not entirely realistic to ask people to go back to landlines because many of them will, go and get the 900 megahertz phones, which are even worse.
I had such a phone, a cordless phone, for 15 years, and I trashed it when I found out that
right.
it give you heart palpitations and what have you.
My father-in-law in his 90s was living in a memory care unit and began exhibiting Parkinsonian gait with his walker. And we'd never seen this before.
He was in what type of unit? He was
a Parkinsonian gait, Parkinson-like symptoms. And he had the deck phone, the cordless deck phone in his room that they had put there for him. And, we took that out, and within a week, we never saw those symptoms. We never saw those symptoms again.
Wow.
That's, it's absolutely. And Paul Harding would tell us stories because he had mitigated so many homes across the country on clients whose symptoms had resolved, just mitigating things. But yes, I tell parents that, this is a potentially very dangerous device, and it has to be used judiciously. And we talk about it being in airplane mode. We talk about talking on speaker only. We talk about not using it, next to our heads. We talk about it with all patients, not sleeping with it in even the same room, or at least turning it off. So many patients have sleep dysfunction. And then not only that, but to mention, melatonin from the actual EMFs themselves, the melatonin suppression. And then there's probably some melatonin suppression from, there is melatonin suppression from the screen time. So, it's a very...
Just to explain, melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland, and it not only coordinates or whatever our biological clock, but it's also a very potent tumor fighter.
Correct. It has anti-tumor effects, and it's, a neurotropic hormone. It's essentially, a very key component of our central nervous system wellness. So
light and EMFs lower that secretion.
Right, correct. And then, getting back to the dementia component, the articles mention the hippocampus is near and dear to my heart, going back to my days at McGill, and, the key experiments that were done at the Montreal Neurological Institute, where, for seizure disorders, they had removed hippocampus, which is the temporal lobe gyri that are on the inferior medial part of the temporal lobes, and clearly involved with memory. And the data now shows that there's clearly hippocampal degeneration in direct relationship to, cell phone proximity to the brain. And so, this is well known, and there's a Dartmouth professor that we're working with who has he's an electrical engineer that has a modeling system that can look at this exposure model literally in brain slices of the hippocampus. And so, we've got, direct evidence that, this is not a benign technology that, we're dealing with.
Yeah.
One of them.
Is myelin degeneration just a hypothesis, or we have enough studies showing that insulation around nerves is being degraded by those microwaves?
Well, I'm not 100% certain on the details if it was myelin. I do remember reading dendritic, the actual dendritic. Those are the connection points. So there's actually lack of dendritic connections in the hippocampus as a function of increasing EMFs.
Okay.
So
because the two rat studies at the U.S. National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute in 2018 both found schwannomas of the heart, and schwannoma is where the glial cells in the myelin are attacked. That's where the cancer was developing around the hearts of those rats.
Right. So the Schwann cells are the the lining cells of the nerves, and I would hypothesize that this is in direct correlation with the known DNA damage that EMFs produce in neural cells. So what you have there is a dysregulation of Schwann cell growth, resulting in tumorigenesis. So you essentially have a broken DNA and then abnormal coding, CODING, coding for abnormal Schwann cells that clump together and form a tumor. So it's not benign. It's intricately linked, and there's a whole biochemistry, if you will, of EMFs and neuronal function and cellular function, for that matter. It also affects people's hearts when held, when a cell phone is held in the chest pocket. The mitochondria of the myocardial muscles are affected, and so we have a whole cascade of biochemical events that are basically disrupted in the course of this exposure.
Also, people should know that the DNA repair mechanisms are being harmed, and several other problems are occurring, like oxidative stress. So it's really a long list. I'm looking for a study by actually a presentation that was just sent by Dimitris Panagopoulos, who was at the European Parliament in April. If I could just pull it up, it explains how the natural and artificial fields are different, notably that they're polarized. But maybe I can send you the paper. But one thing that really struck me is that he said that both an increase, a 20 to 30% increase in natural EMFs from the ground or artificial, are enough to provoke biological harm. So that's the problem with your cell phone or your Wi-Fi, which is always giving you peaks of exposure. It's not constant, and it's coherent contrarily to natural fields, which are not polarized and not coherent. In any case, that's a small glimpse at the science. But tell me about the Yale study you mentioned in the EMF conference. The thyroid cancers are going up too?
Yeah, so they looked at specifically thyroid cancer and found a direct correlation with cell phone exposure to the head and neck, indicating a thyroid cancer link. This has also been found with other head and neck cancers. Salivary gland tumors have been reported. along with other, head and neck cancers. So, but specifically, this Yale study came out, I think, within the last 3 years, and is a well done paper with clear evidence of oncologic, cancer effect from cell phones.
Mm-hmm. So you're working politically now with the Environmental Health Trust. Where is there
Well,
is there any hope that we get politicians involved?
I would like to think that I guess it is political. I would like to think that we're apolitical. I didn't know that health and human safety would become a political issue, but it is. And yes, the elephant in the room is, the last I looked, and it's over 5-year data, the $250 million telecom lobby that occurs in our houses of representatives, and it's probably well in excess of that, because if that's what's reported, Lord knows what's not reported. And so there are certain interest groups that have a vested interest in seeing this technology move forward. Yeah, it's a small organization that's a nonprofit, and what's the saying? Bad things happen when good people fail to do nothing, and we have to do something. And I would feel remiss if I weren't in some way involved in this effort to make people more conscious, to make people more aware. It's like, the old saying, it's, if we save one life, it's like we've saved the whole world. But, literally, if we can educate youth to become more aware that, they don't need this, they really don't need this technology 24/7, that it can be used judiciously, and friends, relatives, family members can be informed about, just the general risks that are inherent in our everyday lives in terms of cell phone exposure and living in Wi-Fi environments. So, yes, I guess it's political. We have a particular presidential hopeful candidate that, although his chances are slim of winning, at least he has an awareness of, what's involved with health and human safety. He has his Children's Health Defense Fund, and, has written extensively, on these issues. So, there's hope. And that's sort of where I am along the spectrum of this. But it's one of those things where we have Hollywood stars protesting against carbon footprints, and are these people really not taking a plane to fly to their destination? I mean, there's some level of hypocrisy there, but at least I feel like I walk the walk and talk the talk. In other words, if someone comes and asks me, did I get their message? I can say, no, I didn't turn on my phone for the last, 5 hours, but, let me see, if I can find your message, because ultimately, I get back to everybody, but not in the most instantaneous fashion. So, and that's kind of where I am along the spectrum of things.
Experienced it firsthand with your wife and yourself in your home, with all that technology making you sick. And as you said at the EMF conference, you were living the experiment with your patients, actually seeing more and more.
Right.
I just showed us a few slides from the Environmental Health Trust website. People should read up about the science, but look at all those policies in all those different countries, such as France actually banned Wi-Fi in daycares and in the early primary school years, unless it's really necessary for educational purposes. They just unplug it. And I know personally a little boy who's living 4 streets away from where I grew up in Beaconsfield in the West Island, Montreal, and so sick. He had one of the only ways for him to have protection is to take a bath with Epsom salts and have a photo of him where he's all red in the face and his ear. And so he's gotten compassion from his pupils, his students with him, his friends and his teachers and the school nurse. But once it gets above the school principal and it gets to the school board, well, then they say Health Canada says there's no danger. And it's so sad. Like Courtney Gilardi's family in Massachusetts, they had to abandon their dream home because a cell tower went up. So people don't realize, they're not informed. They don't realize what's happening. I've been writing about for 30 years, and I can say in the last decade, it's exploded the number of people who are really either very ill or they make the connection with the pain in the ear or the head.
Yeah, so getting back to the two questions that you mentioned, I've become political. The Environmental Health Trust and the FCC issue, they ruled against the FCC, but mind you, now it's been at least 2 years and the FCC has done nothing. Yeah. And so, you see that this willful negligence of almost like, just try to come after us, because now we have captive regulatory agencies, and I'm not sure what the situation is in Canada, but Frank Clegg, can tell you that. But sadly, we have these captive agencies in this country.
When I mentioned Repicoli, he's a former Health Canada civil servant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then on this sensitivity to EHS, I tell everybody that if there's not a identifiable source in your home, such as something obvious like the EMF or cell tower, across the block from you, everyone should look for mold exposure. Yeah. Because the child, if there's no other source, the child should make sure that hasn't been exposed to mold or have ongoing mold issues, which hypersensitize the nervous system to the EMF effects.
A lot of doctors believe it's the first trigger of electrohypersensitivity.
Right.
Nagy. Right. Well, my God, we could talk for hours.
Yeah. It's a big topic. But
I think neurosurgeon involved, and there's one in Australia. Are there more who are listening in?
No, they're not. No, because they're too busy taking care of neurologic disease and illness. And the statistic on neurosurgeons, and I forgot what it was, but the last time I looked, the U.S. is facing a significant crisis in retiring neurosurgeons. There's something like going to be 15%, even potentially 20% fewer neurosurgeons in the next 20 years. And here we are, completely burdened with probably, brain tumors that show up in the emergency rooms at least a couple times a week now, whether they're metastatic, primary, or, some offshoot, like believe it or not, central nervous system lymphoma occurs now with greater frequency than it ever had. So, they're very busy as a group, and advocacy is not something that we've done in terms of the public health, I would say. However, having said that, I think that this thing with Sharon Goldberg and the EMF inventory, if we can just get a few people on board to start doing the EMF inventory, even at the primary care stage, and then, at the neurology and even neurosurgery stage, it would be a step in the right direction.
Do you have a PDF of that questionnaire you could send?
No, it's something we're working on.
Okay, great.
Something we're working on. And, and now, of course, with cell phones, there probably is a function to look at I know there's a screen time calculator, but I'm not sure if it correlates with the time it's actually on and connected or searching for a signal. But that would be, something worth looking at going forward to see, how much are we connected and how much are we actively sending and receiving EMF content over one's lifetime, and
Yeah,
it's
because the meta-analysis by Moskowitz and colleagues, I think it was 43 studies, and they found it was only 17 minutes a day on average over 10 years that you need to talk on your cell phone against your head to, I think it was 60% increase in glioma or something like that.
right.
And
Yeah.
it's, people are really not aware. I showed the plastic skull of Sam, which the manufacturers can use, they do use to test their cell phones or marketing them. And there was, the iPhone, what is it, the 18 that was removed from the for
iPhone 12, iPhone 12.
12 in France, which was removed for a few days, and then they just changed a programming update on it, and they're allowed to sell it. But I think it's worthwhile to explain how those phones are tested. Uh, it used to be they were 5 to 15 millimeters from the head. Now they say that some of the tests are 0 millimeters, but that SAM Phantom doesn't really, it's not a reliable proxy of a child's skull, is it?
No, it doesn't come anywhere near close. We've got decreased skull thickness in children, and we also have higher water content. And so, we have, greater potential for that oxidative stress that you mentioned and mitochondrial DNA disruption. And basically, that model, independent modeling, looking at more human-like models. This is simply gel in a plastic skull and looking at heating effects. And it's amazing to me that is what we're basing health and human safety on. But independent testing labs in California, have looked at specific absorption rates of 5 and 10 times higher than what was actually tested in this plastic skull with the gel, and this is should, dare I say it, it's criminal, but it's also very disturbing, that this is the data that people rely on to make informed decisions, and basically are duped into believing that their devices are safe, and especially let alone next to their heads. So
Yeah, I should add that the test is, you only fail if you're absorbing too much, and the regulation says, and the regulation is based on heating of 1 degree of a liquid in that skull, but it has nothing to do with cancer or any of the non-thermal effects. And what I found out also is that, one, the manufacturer can choose their lab where they do the test,
right.
and they only use the carrier frequency. So it's not like you're talking on your phone and you're downloading different updates where they have several different frequencies. And the Chicago Tribune, Sam Rowe, reporter, a Pulitzer prize winner, wrote about this, where they financed tests with an independent lab, and the iPhone and Samsung and I think Motorola, different models, were not respecting that limit, that federal limit, which only looks at the heating effects.
Right. And we didn't even mention miscarriage. Hugh Taylor, MD, is a fertility specialist at Yale and has already written extensively on this. But there's the 2017 study from Lai and colleagues, found a threefold increase in miscarriage with everyday exposure in 913 pregnant women who were wearing these exposure meters. And going back to the specific absorption rates of these phones, an independent testing lab tested the iPhone 11 and discovered it exposes its users to a specific absorption rate of 3.8 watts per kilogram, even though the FCC has these standards that date back to 1996 of 1.6 watts per kilogram. So everything is sort of shrouded in uncertainty and actually false data, if you will, lulling the public into believing that their regulatory agencies have their best interests at heart, and sadly they don't. So yeah.
Closing, I'd like to show you something I'm very proud of. When smart meters came out in 2012, there was a letter written in a Montreal daily signed by 50 university professors. None of them, of course, were physicians or had done any EMF and health research. And they were just saying smart meters are safe. Who would they to say that? I don't know, but some of them are linked to industry. And so I was waiting for a rebuttal to be published, and none came about. So I contacted David Carpenter, who, when I started as a reporter, got $5 million from New York State to study the link, or to coordinate studies about childhood leukemia and power line magnetic field exposure. So we spent the whole summer on this rebuttal. And I'm very proud to say we had 50 experts who contributed or co-signed. They're all listed here. And one of them is a neurosurgeon. And what he said, Dr. Kurana, is that adverse neurological effects have been reported in people who stay in close proximity to a wireless meter, especially under 10 feet. So, of course, some people, can feel a cell tower a kilometer away. I didn't believe it, but it's true. And a lot of people say, well, I'm not electrosensitive. And I asked them, are you electrical? Can we measure your heart rate and can we do an EEG and EKG on you? Of course, we're all electric. And that's what we found, that a lot of people sleeping sometimes in apartment buildings. Some people, I know a family, they had 6 smart meters right next to their bed in the bedroom. So it's just a point I wanted to highlight. That paper, that rebuttal by Dr. Carpenter, is still going around the world, and I'm very proud of it because people need to read the data.
Yeah.
And the opinion of these experts who are really, as yourself, you have no interest in bashing the cell phone industry. You use technology a lot in your career.
I was able to, urgently look at my patients' scans, when I needed to, when I was on call, and decide, I could direct treatment remotely and then be on my way into the hospital. So, it's certainly transformed and revolutionized medicine. Medicine is not what it used to be in some levels, and then on some levels, it's really, quite amazing. So, I always use the matrix analogy. We can be red pillars or blue pillars, and I kind of choose to be a red pill person. Neo in the film uses technology to get where he needs to get, but he's also has an awareness of the world around him. He has an awareness of the greater agenda, and I think that's something that I've aspired to, in this area. So
Yeah, and you're not anti-technology. That's it.
no, not
I
at
love
all.
Wi-Fi when I go to a hotel or a conference to use it, but at home,
Absolutely,
I have
absolutely.
no wireless devices at my home.
That's right. If we had a live EMF conference, we'd invariably have to use the technology to put on the conference. I mean, that's the irony.
Couldn't
So
just be cabled.
we
Wi-Fi.
were using. They had Wi-Fi, and they had disabled it in certain parts of this Scotts Valley resort. I can't remember. And then they had an area specifically set off in the audience where people were not supposed to be on cell phones or iWatches, iPhones, so that those people that were sensitive, could actually sit there and feel more comfortable. So
Designated zones where you can use your phone.
yeah, yeah. And then they actually had cables. They had set up multiple areas, tabletops with cables, so people could check in and not have to use a wired device. So again, you realize the impracticality of that. But it was a very nice gesture for that meeting.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of those, more of those venues in coming years where you have a few Ethernet cables to hook up.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that's true.
Well, Dr. Hillel Baldwin from Arizona, thank you very much for
My
talking
pleasure.
neurology and EMFs, and I wish you good health and looking forward to meeting you because I was there in Scottsdale Valley. we weren't introduced, but next time hope to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, Andre. Au revoir. Merci beaucoup. Good to
Merci
see
beaucoup.
you. Okay. Take care. Bye.